We've chosen to use Zoom once again in these very difficult times to catch up with our next special guest on The Informer. He's the MD at the Leadership Sphere. His name is Phillip Ralph. Phillip, welcome.
Thank you, George. Great to be here.
How did you get into this leadership development role that you've been a part of for quite some time?
So I, as an 18-year-old, I didn't run away and join the circus. I ran away and joined the police force. So I literally joined the police force when I was 19 and 1 week old. So looking back now, I was way too young, but anyway, I did. And so an 18-year career, working in the psychology unit, working at the academy as a trainer, working on police shootings and retraining police really got me interested in leadership development. And, I guess as a police officer, you see both the worst and the best of people. And I was fascinated by how people ticked, and I just wanted to do more of it. So I did quite a lot of facilitation and leadership development within Victoria Police, but in 2000 I just thought it was time for a change, and so left and pursued a corporate career in leadership development. So
that's a fantastic opportunity to cover some territory from a different perspective. Can I just take you back into those days when you were part of the police force? The police at the moment, in my opinion, have been put into harm's way like never before. They're being asked to do things that I don't know if you've ever trained for. So what advice would you have for the young men and women and the men and the women who in blue who do, more often than not, a fantastic job? They are our only line of defence, if you think about it. And so often we give them short shift, and we shouldn't. What advice would you have for them in these extraordinarily difficult times? I don't want to say unprecedented because it's a word that we're tired of, we're exhausted of. But what advice would you give, whether it's here, whether it's in New South Wales, WA or wherever? They're being asked to do many more things than they were ever trained to do.
Yeah, absolutely, George. And it is easy to be an armchair critic, isn't it? So I really appreciate the question. I think I concur with everything you said in terms of it's a really challenging role, and it's easy to, criticise them. But the advice I would give, and it's hard to put a wise head on young shoulders, but it's just before taking actions to take a breath and just create a little bit of space between what happens in the field and what your actions or response will be. Sometimes they don't have that time, but even just a couple of seconds is just to pause and think and reflect before action is taken. And I see sometimes, and some of the incidents that occur in the media, and you can just see that the adrenaline surges, the primitive brain kicks in, the thinking part of the brain is taken out sometimes, despite all of the training that police undergo, and you see things that probably people wouldn't be necessarily proud of or supportive of when they watch the footage back. So I think try and develop a calm head as quickly as possible and just create a little bit of space in those incidents where practical.
That's almost the sort of advice you'd give anyone who's tweeting these days, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. For goodness sake, less diploma by diploma by Twitter, and or diplomacy by Twitter, and more dialogue and more conversation, I think. And that was certainly during the police shootings in the 80s and 90s, and I was fortunate enough to be involved in a project which really aimed to change the mindset from one of being the hero and potentially crashing down the door or trying to resolve the situation as quickly as possible, is just to tactically create some space between what has just happened and our response. And police shootings went from 1 per month for 14 months to no shootings for 3 years back in 1994, 95. And I know that's a long time ago, and there's a cocktail of drugs and alcohol and all sorts of things, but they were present back then as well. And it's not that different to leadership in a way. When something happens, don't respond immediately. We've just got to create some space between what happens in the world, and then how we respond to it.
Tell me something. In this day and age, you're talking to CEOs and others about the challenges that they face. When you go to the corporate world, do you talk to them about having, for example, an idea about preparing themselves for the day when they will need assistance in the time of crisis? So I'm virtually asking, do people call you and say, I need to set a crisis management plan up before we go into this new business or before we start this new chapter in our growth? Lord knows the worst time for crisis management is after the event.
Absolutely, that's right. And unfortunately, George, as you probably have guessed, and I can tell by the question, that often we're brought in after the crisis has already occurred. But those who are maybe thinking ahead, a little bit ahead of the game, really help us or ask us to support them to build plans around when things happen in the business, and particularly personally. So I don't care whether you're brand new to an organisation or you're a seasoned chief executive. We're people at the end of the day, and we're subject to the same fears and concerns and frailties and the things that kind of go on in our head, and how do you prepare people for that? And I think that's a really smart way to do it, is to prepare people for the times when they do fall over, the times when they do experience setbacks and failure. And for some people, they go into a vicious cycle of self-destruction, or at least self-doubt, as a bare minimum. I love asking that question in a room or with a leadership team. Who here has imposter syndrome or sometimes suffers self-doubt? And without hesitation, normally about 100% of the room will put their hand up. And so if that's the case when they're sitting calmly and relaxed in a room,
imagine
what is their response going to be when the pressure is really on, or shareholders are screaming and breathing down their neck, or their name have just appeared in the newspaper or their organisation. So, yeah.
Lord knows in 2020 we've had so many disruptions. What are going to be the top disruptive trends of, say, 2021? You need to know them now almost, don't you?
Well, that's right. And I think there are a number of things that we need to think about. And the current pandemic is really, we can either see it as a crisis or an opportunity. It's definitely a crisis, and I don't mean to minimise that in terms of the impact, both on people and for society. But as an opportunity, I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reset how we think about how we manage people. And I think there are a number of trends, and one of those is about, I think, being braver in how we lead our organisations and being more ethical. And I was trying to count up the number, and it's probably not something you should normally do, but I was trying to count up the number of royal commissions and inquiries and processes that are ongoing at the moment, which are looking at leadership. And I read just in the last few weeks about the Rio Tinto example, where the Donikian gorge in the Pilbara. So 46,000 years of constant human occupation, and the two caves were blown up by the organisation. And there's an internal review, and the review said that everyone and no one was accountable. And I think that's one of the things in 2021 that we're really going to have to focus more heavily on. That what does accountability look like? What does ethical leadership look like? So it's as much a trend as a call to action, I think. It was interesting, George, in terms of that case, that whilst they'd had an internal review and they cut $7 million off the bonuses of the chief executive and two of the executives who made the decision to blow up the two Indigenous caves, they thought, in setting up the inquiry, they thought that would be the end of the story. But the shareholders revolted, and including 90 funds from the UK said, no, that's not enough. And so because of that immense pressure for more ethical decision-making with accountability, the CEO and the two executives will now be standing down very soon. So I think that is a really strong trend. How do we bring that to modern organisations where we're both more ethical and braver.
And they've got to understand that if their CEO or the MD, the buck normally stops with them.
Yeah, that's right. The buck does stop with them, and frankly, if we look at organisations, and this happened only just last week, I had someone on a program, and they were talking about the bullying that they saw and had been personally had received, the sexual harassment, the poor behaviour that we still seem to tolerate in organisations, and I think we just have to reset. That's one of the trends I think next year. We just have to reset and be braver and more courageous in calling out poor behaviour.
Well, I think the example you're giving is the AMP. They were talking about their antics and the fact that they knew about it and they didn't shield and protect this member of the staff, which was quite shocking. I think they've come to the party, but late. But it seems to me that you think that one of the most important qualities of leadership in 21 and beyond will be the ability to focus on the immediate problem and address it. Yes or no?
Yes, I do. And I keep talking about braver leadership. What I mean by that is, the inquiry here in Victoria, we're very aware of a hotel inquiry. And I noted that one of the bureaucrats who gave evidence at the inquiry, the commentary was around this in the public service, this creeping culture of compliance, which you'd have to say is the opposite of bravery. And one of the bureaucrats actually gave evidence he testified to say that he's repeatedly told by his own boss to stay in our lane. In other words, don't go outside our remit, don't challenge, don't call out things you think are not working well, stay in our lane. If that's the kind of organisations we're going to accept as a community, I think we're in real trouble. So that's what I mean by be more courageous, be braver, call out BS, call out stuff that's happening. Don't be compliant or sit back and be passive.
Phillip Ralph from the leadership sphere, thank you for calling it out and saying it as it should be. And we wish you continued success and stay safe.
Oh, thanks very much, George. My pleasure.